Hello guys, I'm Fake Flip from Brazil and I'm here in Turkey today to explain to you about the tides. Tides are very different. Everywhere you go in the world, they're different from place to place. They can be a lot bigger in some places and a lot smaller in others. Here in Turkey, for example, there are virtually no tides on all seas around Turkey. Turkey has here where I am in Didim in Turkey. Here this is the Mediterranean or the Aegean Sea. The Aegean and the Mediterranean. So here the tides are negligible. I'm going to turn the camera so you can see how negligible the tides are at low tide. It's low tide now. Check it out. So this is low tide. Here it's about 12-13 centimeters. Very, very small tides. In other places you get 12 to 13 meters. Like in Liverpool in the United Kingdom, and also Bristol in the United Kingdom, you get there 11 12 meters of tides. Here you get 12 centimeters of tides. So when we talk about tides, we have to consider these things. So believing in gravitation of the moon or diamagnetism of the sun, things like that, things related to the stars and the sun and the moon have nothing to do with the tides. They don't explain what happened in the tides. If they did, then there would be some correspondence between the times where the sun goes and all the incidents of the sun. The tides would respond to that. There would be a bigger area where the tides would happen at the same time. We don't see that in places like the United Kingdom. We have tides completely opposite in times, in very small distances, like Bristol and Bournemouth, and also sizes between Bristol and Bournemouth, like the distance is about 100 miles. 100 miles in distance, but the size of the tides is ridiculously different. In Bristol you get up to 12 meters, 12 meters of tides. In Bournemouth you get about 3 meters of tides. So the sizes are very different. And also you have there the times of the tide. So when one tide is high, the other one should be high as well. They should be high and low at the same time. They should be up and down at the same time if the stars above, like the sun and the moon, made the tides. It's not what happens. You get high in one and low in the other, or one growing and the other lowering. So the tides don't correspond in times. You can get completely opposite times in a very short distance, like London and Medway, for example. Also any other place in the world, like for example in the Bay of Fundy, you can get 13 meters in Port Elmhurst. In Port Elmhurst you can get 13 meters, and in Port Elgin, that is about 20 kilometers away, I don't know, 20 miles away, really close by, you get just 1 meter. So it has nothing to do with the moon or the sun. It has nothing to do with that. So what causes the tides is a system of springs underneath the water. So underneath the water we have lots of springs, plenty of freshwater springs, just under all the ocean, just as many springs as we have above the sea level on the continents. There are also plenty of freshwater springs in the ocean, and they have a lot more pressure. And also they can be intermittent or permanent. So those permanent, perennial springs, the ones that make rivers, for example, they inject water all the time. But there are plenty of intermittent springs which only inject water for some period of time and then they stop, for another period of time and then they stop. And that explains the tides, because some tides are also longer than others. There are places that take 5 hours to grow until the high tide. Some places take 6 hours to go until high tide, and some places go for 6 hours, then they get lower, but not so much lower. They get for example, they go up to 4 meters in high tide, but then in low tide it's 3.5 meters is also pretty high tide, but they consider as low tide. That's because the springs that are underneath the ocean, they work in an intermittent period. So when one starts, the other one may start a bit later. So they can work for about 9 hours. So you get 6 hours of a very high tide and another 3 hours of not so much high tide. So that explains the tides, for example, near Vancouver in Canada. They can last up to 9 hours, still very high. So about 6 hours in 4 meters, and then about another 3 hours, 3.5, which they consider low, but it's not actually low. And then it goes to another high or to a very low of a 1 meter much later on. So this is what explains. It's the springs that we have under the ocean. So there are plenty of them, injecting fresh water all the time, in intermittent periods, but they keep injecting, renewing the oxygen in the water. Otherwise, the water would become too salty, because the salt is already in the ocean, in the salt mines. There are plenty of salt mines, and that's why the ocean gets salty. Here where I am, for example, the salinity is higher than other places. Here in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, the salinity here is higher. Here is 38 grams per liter, 3.8%. Whereas to the western part of the Mediterranean Sea, the salinity there is 34 grams per liter. So that's about 3.4%. So 3.4% there, 3.8% here. There is more salt here than there. And the reason is the tides. The tides explain this salinity, because here there are very small tides. As you can see, the tides here, I'll show you again. This is low tide. This is low tide. Look. Low tide, you get a very, very, very small variation. So this is about 12 centimeters. That's the tides that we get here in this area of Turkey. So because of the low tides here, the salinity becomes higher. That's why there is more salt in this water, because there is less fresh water being injected here. That's why. This is also something that most people don't know. Salinity has nothing to do with tides. It's the opposite. The tides have to do on the salinity. They control the salt. And that's why in places with very small tides or virtually no tides, like the eastern part of the Mediterranean, the salinity tends to get higher. The same happens, for example, in the Red Sea. The Red Sea has 42 grams, 41, 42. It has a gradual salinity, just like the Mediterranean has a gradual salinity. So the closer to the salt mines, the saltier. And the amount of fresh water injected there is also very small. So the tides in the Red Sea are also pretty small, just not as small as they are here. Here it's even smaller. And the whole of Turkey has very small tides. For example, the Sea of Marmara. The Sea of Marmara to the south of Istanbul is also like this. Tides there are about 4, 5, 10 centimeters. Really, really small. They can be considered as amphidromic points. Many scientists call these places amphidromic points. They don't even know what amphidromic points are, and they just say it's amphidromic points because from these places the tides begin to be noticed. That's how they say. Well, amphidromic points are, in my conception, what finishes with the tides, what kills the tides. So the tide is the injection of water. The tides is the injection of water, and the amphidromic points, they suck this water out from the ocean. So the water is injected in many parts. The tides are made, and then the tides is spread around the ocean, spread over there, spread, and the level remains the same. So the level remains the same because there are amphidromic points which suck the water from the ocean constantly, permanently. There are many points like that. I don't know all of them, but I know many of them. So there are two in Norway, for example. There are 2 points in Norway. Like they make huge whirlpools on the surface because they keep sucking a huge amount of water permanently from that area of the Atlantic. Also in Scotland, in the Gulf of Corryvreckan, there is another one. And here in the Mediterranean Sea, there is one in the center of the Mediterranean Sea in Messina, Italy. So there in Messina, there is one amphidromic point. That's the amphidromic point of the Mediterranean Sea. So all the tides made in that area, because in Venice there are tides, you get up to a meter in Venice. There are tides in the south of Spain, France, northern Morocco, Tunisia. You get small tides there, about 60 centimeters, about I don't know, maybe 80 centimeters, 40 centimeters. So it's about 4 to 6 times higher than this side. So here in this side we get 10 centimeters maximum, 12 centimeters, 4, 5 centimeters, really small tides, because they get to here when they arrive here, the tides are already a lot smaller because they've been sucked there, and also they've diffracted in many of the islands, so they get here a lot smaller. But to that side there are some tides. So these amphidromic points is what sucks, removes the water from the ocean and probably brings it back to its place of origin. The place of origin is the primordial ocean. So we have a primordial ocean, and the water from the primordial ocean is pure, is drinkable, is pure water, and that pure water is what is injected from underneath the ocean, and also on above the sea level in the continents. We also have plenty of freshwater springs. About 99.99% of the springs is fresh water. Just almost nothing, almost very few of the springs that we have above the sea level contain salt or a gas or some sort of sulfate or sulfite or some other sort of like a iron. They can contain iron as well, but the majority, 99.9999% of them is fresh water. So that's because the water outside the firmament, the water outside where God is and the angels, that water is pure, and that water penetrates from underneath, and that's what keeps us alive. That's what keeps us alive. That's what keeps the levels of oxygen in the ocean good, and keeps the life in the ocean. Without that water, we would die. The ocean would become salty, just like the Dead Sea. It would kill everything. So that's the water from the firmament, from outside the firmament. The waters above, that's what keeps us alive. So and that's what explains the tides as well. So it's this is the explanation of tides, guys. Right? The water from outside, the water from the primordial waters, they penetrate from underneath in certain points. In points like this, in places like this, like the whole of the western part of the Mediterranean Sea, including the Aegean Sea, the Marmara, the Sea of Marmara also has no tides. The Black Sea has no tides. Also the Baltic in the northern part of Europe, the Baltic Sea has no tides. Tides in Helsinki, tides in Stockholm, they are virtually zero. They're even smaller than this. Here we get about 13 centimeters. There they get like 4 or 5 centimeters, nearly nothing. In the south of Norway, in Egersund, they have nothing. They have like 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters. In the Sea of Japan, in the areas of Metsui, in the areas of Totori, in the areas of Shimane, in those places they have virtually no tides. It's like this also, like 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters, 5 centimeters, like nothing. So in places like this there are no tides, and the reason is because there are no springs. There are no springs underneath. That's why, and that's the explanation of tides. It's the springs underneath in high pressure. When these springs they burst, depending how close they are to the surface also, and depending on their magnitudes, they can change, they can alter the surface of water. You can have that surface of water that is very similar to when you spring water from underneath a plastic pool, a plastic swimming pool that you have in the garden. If you put the water, injecting water from underneath in the pool, you get the same effect that you get in some parts of the ocean. You get that water opening in a circle in the surface, changing the texture of the surface of the water. The same thing you can get in the ocean as well. That texture becomes smoother, glassy. The texture of the surface changes, opens in a wide circle, and spreads over the ocean. So half of it, half of that circle comes to the coast, and the other half goes to the other side of the ocean. Sometimes if you have a channel, it goes to the other side of the channel. It happens in the channel, in the English Channel, for example. This is what explains the tides in the English Channel, where you have in the side of France, in Saint-Malo, you have, for example, about 10, 11 meters of tides in one side of the channel. But in Bournemouth, to the other side of the channel, in Bournemouth, in England, you get only 3 meters of tides. So this is what explains the tides. So the tides open, half come to one coast and the other half goes to the other coast, and some spread to the sides as well. So that's how the tides are made, from underneath, and they open and they change the texture of the surface in some places depending on the depth and also on the magnitude of these springs. So if they have a very high, very intense magnitude, they can change, and also if they are very close to the surface. So obviously if it's very, very deep, too deep, they will probably not change the pressure won't be enough to change the surface and create that effect of a different texture. But depending on the place, yes. So for example, in these images that you're seeing there, the depth there is 50 meters. So these sailors who filmed this and who showed this, they said that the depth they were was 50 meters only, and probably a very, very big and very intense magnitude of these springs. So also these the springs underneath the ocean, they also explain the timings of the tides, because you have tides with very different timings in very close by areas. For example, in London and in Medway, they're very close by. In England, right? London and Medway in England. Also places like, for example, Macapá and Belém do Pará in Brazil. They're also relatively close by, and you have very different timings in these places. Places like, for example, Bristol and Liverpool. They're very close by. However, the timings of the tides can be totally the opposite. So you might have a high tide in Bristol, but a low tide at the same time, a low tide in Liverpool. And the same can happen there in London. You might have a high tide in London, but in Medway, that is only about 40 miles away, you can have a low tide at the same time. So you can have one high and the other low at the same time, even in very close by areas. The same happens in Brazil, in many other places as well. So for example, you can have a high tide in Macapá, but a low tide in Belém do Pará at the same time. So this thing can even be done live. We could even open a live here in my channel, a live transmission. We could put an observer in one of these cities and an observer in the other one of the cities. They both would get into the live transmission through links that I could give the links. They could enter at the same time and show the tides, just like I'm showing here now. Show the tides right now in both, right at the moment. In both places at the same time, and people can see that even in close by areas, places like London and Medway, that is only 40 miles away, Bristol and Liverpool, I don't know, about 100 miles away, I don't know how far they are, Macapá and Belém do Pará in Brazil. I'm using these examples because I am from Brazil. Okay, there in Brazil, for example, you can get a high tide in Macapá and a low tide in Macapá at the same time. And also this can happen in many other places, in all places on earth, because this is a rule. And rules of nature, laws of nature, they never have an exception. If you see an exception, for example, to gravity, it's full of exceptions. It's so selective that we can hardly believe it. So anything in nature that has exceptions should not be trusted, because then that's not the explanation. The explanation never has an exception, because the laws of nature do not have exceptions. And the springs underneath, they are the law of nature that creates the tides. The law of nature of the tides is the springs. So there is never an exception in anywhere in the world. So if there are no tides, it's because there are no springs. If there are high tides, it's because there are strong tides. If you have, for example, salinity can change. Here, for example, we have higher salinity, but in the Bay of Fundy, in places with lots of tides, for example, in the Bay of Fundy, the salinity is less than 2%, less than 20 grams per liter near the rivers, obviously because of the water from the rivers, but also the water from underneath. So that water is fresh water, and that's why the water in the Bay of Fundy is almost no salt. It's very little salt because there are very high tides there, and the same happens everywhere in the world. So it's a law. It's a law, and there are never exceptions to that. The salinity gets higher here because there are no tides. There's no water being injected here where I am. So this is the explanation of tides, guys. It's the springs underneath the ocean, and also the holes that exist in many places, the holes that suck the water from the ocean. This is the explanation of tides. So you have an injection of water and water being removed. It's like the system of the Huron fountains. That is a permanent and perpetual motion of water being injected and being sucked at the same time. This is what explains the tides in our oceans, in the seas, and also in lakes, because there are indeed tides in lakes. Many people don't know that, but there are many tides in lakes, Lake Ontario, for example. Actually, all the 5 Great Lakes in the United States and Canada, in the North American Great Lakes, all of them have tides much bigger than these that you can see here. Much bigger tides than this. There, in Toronto, for example, in Lake Ontario, you get 1.5 meters, 150 centimeters. Here you get 15 centimeters. In Toronto, you get 150 centimeters. So that's 1.5 meters of tides there in Toronto. And that's a lake, and it's fresh water. So again, it has nothing to do with salinity. The explanation of tides is the springs underneath the ocean. So if you liked the content, if you liked the explanation, if you're happy, if you feel satisfied with this explanation, don't forget to leave your like to our friend No Fanfare from Australia, my big friend from Australia, No Fanfare. I'm recording this video for his channel, so it's exclusive content to No Fanfare, my big friend from Australia. Big shout out, big hug to you, my friend, and see you around, guys. See you around.